everybody, this is the Wild Ass Podcast, and I am your host, Wild Ass Craig. This is episode 8, and in this episode, I get to introduce all of you to Ryan Hager. Ryan is known as Kidmoto22 on both Instagram and YouTube, where he has about 17,000 followers and subscribers. Ryan is also known in the podcasting world as one of the hosts of the 5 Dirty Bikers podcast, where he is one of the original members. Living in Grand Forks, North Dakota, he's happily married to Tiffany, who he gives credit to for being his most supportive partner. They've been married 26 years and have 2 beautiful girls, Ava, 14, and Mia, 10. Ryan actually began riding in the early 80s as a passenger on a 79 FLH, where he first fell in love with his long trips and moto camping with his parents. As an adult, he was off bikes until 2003 when he purchased his own Kawasaki Vulcan 800 Classic. He went through a couple of bikes and now rides one of the best-looking Road Kings that I've seen. All that being said, let me introduce you to the guy. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Craig.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. I feel like I'm having a celebrity on my little show here.
Oh, hardly. That is so not true.
Well, you know, that's all relevant, right? Because in my world, I listen to your show every week, and you're kind of a big deal in my world.
we've had really good luck on our podcast, and it's been a wild ride. I mean, we started it in 2019, and it has really taken off. We actually on Sunday just eclipsed our 200,000th download, so it was a pretty amazing milestone. So it's been a lot of fun.
That is awesome, and I want to talk about the podcast later on, and I think that was one of my questions, was how many downloads that thing has had. I know we probably talk every other week. I know since I've started this podcast, you've been a big help in telling me, hey, you know, everybody calls and says, oh man, I like what you're doing. I like it. It's cool. But it takes somebody that cares to give you a call and say, hey, you could do this a little bit better. And you've done that for me. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, when in the motorcycle world, especially, right, you reach out to somebody, and more oftentimes than not, if you're asking for help, you're talking, you know, you want to talk to somebody that maybe has done it, been through it, you know, knows more than you two, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, we're all looking for the truth, right? And, you know, I think it's best if you can do that and not hurt somebody's feelings, but really, you know, try to give them a hand up, you know, help them out. It's always a better situation than just telling somebody, you know, kind of the cherry on top of the cake or whatever. And that, at least I've tried to be as transparent as possible and just be a straight shooter when it comes to things like that, because at the end of the day, I think people appreciate that. Maybe not everyone does, but I like to think that they do. So,
well, I know I do. And to your credit, we're trying a new microphone tonight. And I know just before we came on said that the sound quality on the last one was better. And I appreciate you giving me that feedback. And I also appreciate you sticking with me through all that shit that we started with for sound quality. But it was fun.
It's just trial and error. Yeah. I mean, you know, when you open up Pandora's box and you think, you know, everybody on the other end, the listeners, and, you know, thank you all for listening to our podcast. But, you know, it's not just as simple as just, you know, opening up a computer program and start talking. There's really a lot more that goes into any type of podcast. And if you're not really ready to commit to it, it can be extraordinarily daunting. And, you know, the only reason why any of us have any information is because we've all done the whole trial and error process. We've all, you know, started somewhere and found out what works. And, you know, whether it's microphones or soundboards or different programs on the computer, there's lots of ways to get your podcast out there. And I don't think there's any one way that is the absolute way that you have to do it. But, you know, there's a lot of things out there, a lot of tools that will help you in your process to get better. And, you know, the last 2 years has seen a boom in podcasts in particular. And all of the things that you use for podcasts has, you know, gone up in price and in your investment. So your upfront investment is a lot more now than it even was, say, 2-3 years ago.
Well, mine especially, since it was just 2-3 months ago. But no, I just appreciate the input. And like you said, it's just a very daunting task. It's a lot more involved than picking up the phone, having a conversation, and blasting it out there for everybody. So I appreciate you helping me learn it.
Absolutely.
Let's get to this, because I don't want to make these about me. What I want to talk about is you. Let's help some people get to know you. One of the things I mentioned in your bio is that you were a passenger in the early 80s, back on that 79 FLH, which you vaguely remember that bike, if I remember correctly, but how old were you when you were introduced to bikes?
I was probably 8 years old the first time I rode a motorcycle. I would say 8, maybe 7, but I think it's probably 8. Kind of the rule in the house was I had to be able to reach the passenger pegs. And then my mom's ex-husband at the time, or ex-husband now, but husband at the time would, he'd do a walk around, right? So he'd teach me about the walk around, just to go and shake everything, make sure nothing was loose. And if anybody knows anything about late 70s, early 80s Harleys, shit shook loose all the time. So you always wanted to make sure that you started your ride pretty safe. That was a kickover bike, so it had to be kick started. And then we moved quickly into a touring bike, and he had an 85 FXRT, and that was kind of the bike that I think really cemented my love. The other one was rough. It was just the two of us, and it was I'm pretty sure it was a shovel head, and so a lot less refined. The FXRT obviously was rubber mounted, and so they kind of had more of the comfortable aspects of riding a motorcycle was involved in that kind of touring motorcycle. And that's when we started camping, and he actually had that bike retrofit with a sidecar. So my mom and I and he all went camping together with it, and went to rallies and bike events and that kind of stuff. So that was certainly where I started, was as a passenger. And anybody knows, if you've done 2-up riding, that there are some nuances to being a passenger on a motorcycle. You can't just jump on and just go, because that passenger has a lot more control over the bike than you'd think. They shift their weight the wrong way, they lean too hard into a corner, all of that changes your riding. And so I definitely learned some lessons, and got so comfortable on riding on the back of a motorcycle that I could actually sleep on it. So
I've seen that. I've had I've had passengers that fall asleep. Renee does it all the time.
Yeah.
It's funny. So when you were riding, I knew the story of the 85, but I didn't know it had a sidecar. Where did you ride? Back seat or sidecar?
I rode back seat. Initially, the sidecar was for me, but it turns out that I wasn't heavy enough to keep it on the ground. So my mom ended up riding in the sidecar, and I rode on the back. So that was kind of my spot. So
that's cool. That's kind of funny. So did the three of you get to have conversations? Like, could you hear each other, talk to each other as you're going down the road?
It was the very beginning of the comm systems, where you had to be wired into each other. And my mom and her husband were wired up, but I never was. So most of it was just, road sign language. And honestly, a lot of it was just my mom. When we would go through the mountains in California, she'd tap my leg and point over the side, knowing that I was afraid of heights. And she's, pointing down to some, death-defying cliff we'd be driving by. And I'm looking away towards the other side of the road because I didn't want to see it. But, it's hard to, when you're a kid, that perspective of taking in what you're doing. I mean, I had a lot of fun riding on the motorcycle, but I really didn't appreciate where I was riding at the time, because, I was 10, it didn't matter, right? Just felt cool that I was on a bike. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're afraid of heights? Are you still?
Yeah, for sure. You know what it is? I'm not afraid of being someplace high. I'm afraid of falling from someplace high.
How does that affect you riding now? Does it at all when you're riding the side of a mountain, or not really?
It doesn't, because I'm in control. So that's a whole lot different thing. And I think when you're riding the bike, you have a lot more chance to look around, right? But when you're driving the bike, you're paying attention to the road and traffic and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't really give you a lot of opportunity to look over the edge of a mountain and think, oh, I wonder if I went off that. You're just not thinking like that. At least I don't anymore. I know when we went through the Black Hills, and I've been in a couple places where it's been a little bit higher, I really have been more in awe of the scenery than afraid of it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Otherwise, twisties and mountain riding wouldn't be in the cards for me. So
probably not. So what she'd point, do that. Do you have any cool stories that you remember from being a kid on the back of the motorcycle?
You know, I distinctly remember there was a couple of times I remember we were on a poker run, and one of the guys that rode with my parents, he got into an accident and his bike flipped, and he wasn't injured, but his bike was totaled, but he dislocated his thumb, couldn't ride anymore, and the truck that just pulled out in front of him, and he kind of clipped the back end of the truck. And I remembered because they parked on the top of a hill and left me on the bike, and everybody that was on the bike ran to help him or ran to the truck, and the guy in the truck was going to drive away. And it turned out that the truck was a giant white moving truck, like just painted white, and the person driving was a coyote, and so the back end was filled with people they were bringing over the border, and this was in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was going to drive away, and two of the guys jumped up on the side of the truck and basically turned the wheel, and so they grabbed the steering wheel and turned it because he was driving away, and then he backed up over the thing, and they got the truck stuck in the sand, and so he couldn't go anywhere, and then waited for the cops, and no one knew what was in the back. They just didn't want this guy driving away because he just about killed my parents' friend, but
Sure.
and then I remember when we were driving on the 79, I remember we were coming back. It was night. It was dark out, and the pipes on the bike had overheated and had both cracked at basically the exhaust pipes broke, and there was blue flame shooting out below my feet.
Going down the highway.
Yeah, going down the highway. So that was a lot of fun, but yeah, I mean, I think, like typical, like very typical things that you would expect from riding motorcycles in Southern California in the 80s. I mean, there's obviously a pretty big club presence. There was then, and as a kid, you just didn't, I never saw any of those guys as somebody to be afraid of, or that I was intimidated, because I was part of the group, right? So you just kind of, I was a kid riding with everybody else, and so it wasn't really a thing. I mean, I had my jean jacket vest with the sleeves cut off with all my touring pins on it, my big, Harley Eagle on the back, and I mean, it was just, what the stereotypical, exactly what you'd expect from motorcycling in the 80s. I mean, when you pulled up to the campground and you put up your tents and everything, it was just what you'd expect. I mean, everybody was sitting around the campfire and drinking beer at night, and then during the day, everybody was doing the poker runs and toy runs and that kind of stuff. So I would say that during that time, and I look back on it now, it was very stereotypical of what you'd expect riding. If you look back on it, what you'd expect riding in the 80s to look like and feel like was kind of what I grew up in. So,
Oh, it's cool. Do you still have that vest by any chance?
I don't have mine, but I have my mom. She actually sent it to me a couple of years ago. I've had it for 5 or 6 years, and it's got all of our original pins on it from all of the runs that we went on, and yeah, it's super unique. In fact, I'm pretty sure I posted a picture on it of my Instagram probably already 2 years ago, of that vest, and it's just something I'll keep forever. But kind of cool.
It sounds like it. Yeah, too bad you don't have yours. That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I mean, it just kind of my mom got divorced, and those are just one of the things that just got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, bummer. That was all in the 80s. At what point or what age did you know that you were going to be a writer?
You know, from that point on, my life kind of took a bunch of different turns. I spent a lot of time kind of traveling back and forth between my mom and my dad. And so, because it was my mom's second husband that kind of helped me fall in love with motorcycling. And so it wasn't probably until I would say the early 2000s when I really started thinking about it again. And I was working at in healthcare, which is what I work now. And a buddy of mine got one of the anniversary Harley Sportsters. And he said, to me, "Hey, you should think about getting back on a bike," because he knew it was kind of part of my history. And I went to the Harley dealership and I walked around, and this sounds absolutely ridiculous, and maybe some people wouldn't even understand this, but I felt like I didn't deserve a Harley. I felt like I hadn't earned it yet. I hadn't been on a bike at that point in almost 20 years, and I just didn't feel like it was right for me just to buy a Harley. So I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, but so I didn't. I left and I went to the local power sports dealer and I bought a Kawasaki Vulcan 800 for essentially the same price that I could have gotten a Sportster for. And I started on that. It was a Kawasaki Vulcan 800, and it was a runner. I mean, I did nothing. I absolutely did nothing to it in the 5 years that I owned it. I didn't change oil. I never put it on a battery tender. I'm sorry. I changed oil once in 5 years, but I did nothing to that bike.
Well,
And
it was good oil. Why would you want to get rid of it?
yeah, exactly right. But I rode it for probably about 7 years, off and on, usually just seasonal riding. And at that point, I wasn't really doing any trips. My buddy got married and sold his bike, so I was just riding whenever I wanted to by myself. I remember I set a goal for myself one summer, and I remember I did not drive my Tahoe in the entire month of July one summer. I rode to work. Everywhere I went was on the bike in one summer. So I got good use out of that bike, but I never took it on any trips. The farthest I ever went was 100 miles from my house. So my wife and I were in a bit of a transition in our lives, and I needed to sell it, and so I sold it, and and we needed that money to do some things to our house before we sold it. My wife said to me, she said, "I'll someday you can buy another bike. I promise you, you can buy another bike." And I said, I knew my wife has always been supportive of any of my passions, and I knew that when she said that to me, she meant it. And so I was off. I was off a bike again for about another year and a half, and I started a new job in a new location, and finances just kind of lined up. And I remember it was a Tuesday. It was 11:30 at night. I was looking at YouTube, and I ran across, I don't know if it was an ad or something on YouTube about motorcycles. I started watching it, and my wife was sleeping, and I shook her awake, and I said, "Someday's here." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Someday for a motorcycle, it's here." And she said, "Okay." And she rolled over and went back to sleep. And they delivered my 2009 Nightster from the dealership 4 days later on a Friday.
With approval.
Yeah, with approval. Yep. I don't think she expected it to happen that fast, but I looked, I found one, I kind of knew what I wanted, and I knew when I had that Vulcan 800 that if I was going to get a Harley, I wanted to get one that was bigger, that had a little bit more power, and so I decided to go with Sportster 1200 Nightster, and had that bike for about 2.5 seasons. And I commuted back and forth to work. I work about 30 miles from my home. I commuted back and forth to work. I didn't take that bike on any long trips. I rode it around town. And then I knew that I was ready to start my journey on long distance riding and just going on longer trips. And long distance for me, I know that I'm not I'm not a 100,000 miles in 100 days kind of guy, but I knew I wanted to do trips. I was interested in motorcycle camping and hadn't been camping at all in 25 or 30 years. So I was ready for that next adventure, and that's when I bought my 2017 Road King Special.
So it's a special. I was going to ask you about that. Couple things that came to mind there. You're not a very small guy. Explain yourself, because you're a bigger dude.
Yeah, so I'm 6'3", I'm about 230 pounds. Yeah, so I'm not small, and so I knew that when I rode the Sportster, and it never really felt small because I had taller bars and I rocked them forward. It had forward controls, but I still was in that kind of clam shape or C shape or V shape, whatever you want to call it. I was a little bit more cramped up, and so I knew that if I was going to do long distance riding, that I was ready to move up to a larger bike. And I wasn't ready at that point for a full fairing motorcycle. And I wanted to stay away from chrome. And so the Road King Special kind of just clicked all my boxes. It was the, touring platform, but a little bit stripped down, no radio, no frills, but still a bike that could just chew up the miles if I wanted it to. And so I got that bike, and it opened up a whole new world for me after I had that bike. That's when I really started thinking about social media a little bit differently, and that's when I really got serious about maybe thinking about stepping into the social media world and YouTube and doing more on Instagram and that kind of stuff.
That's cool. I didn't see that transition coming at all.
That transition was really just a way for me to, I think, kind of expand. I was very interested in meeting like-minded riders, and what I found is that I found the same thing with the local dealership. It was very difficult to find somebody that was interested in doing what I wanted to do with motorcycles. I wasn't interested in bar hopping. I wasn't interested in, kind of that. I wasn't interested in the very, like, I don't know, maybe Midwestern or upper Midwestern crowd, the ape hangers and get back whips and those kind of things. That didn't appeal to me. And I'm not criticizing those crowds of riders. That just was not my wheelhouse anymore. And so my stepping into the YouTube world was really about, putting myself out there to start to document my own motorcycling history. And I thought about that, just a lot of it in terms of my own legacy. And that was that we all know when you post something online, it's there forever. And I thought, what a cool way to document this period of time in my life that, my kids, my grandkids, could look back and see, hey, this is something that my grandpa did that was kind of cool, and I've always kind of thought about it in terms of that part of it. And it's just evolved from there. I mean, I really started, I guess, on Instagram, just kind of posting pictures, and that's what started me making contacts with people and kind of getting to know people online, which sounds silly, but a lot of those connections have actually formed into real life friendships. And then when I started YouTube, and that really came about from me wanting to expand my horizons of motorcycling beyond just seasonal. So anybody that knows anything about the upper Midwest is we're very seasonal riders here. We can ride about 5 months out of the year, 6 months if you're really brave. And I just started watching YouTube to get my motorcycle fix in the wintertime. And that's when I started discovering the whole world of online, kind of YouTube motovloggers and influencers and things that there was a whole community of motorcyclists online, and just started making connections that way. And that really just exploded my motorcycling adventures. They just took off from there.
That's cool because I always see people on YouTube. I don't sit and watch a lot of YouTube, but
yeah,
I always kind of wonder what their story is and why they got there. So it's cool that now we know yours, I think. So thank you for sharing that. That's very cool.
Absolutely.
About documenting this stuff for children, grandchildren, let's talk a little bit about your personal life. You're married to Tiffany. You have a couple girls.
Yeah.
How often do you get passengers when you go out for a ride?
So my wife and I have done, I'd like to do more trips with her, but she's still kind of working up to the long distance trip. We've done 4 straight days on the motorcycle. We went to Duluth, Minnesota, and spent some time on the North Shore, and that was 4 straight days on a motorcycle. And she rode in every condition during that ride. It was 90 degrees all the way down to rain. We hit wind. We rode in, hilly areas in Duluth, near the North Shore, so near, kind of very almost like a coastline type ride. If you've been near Lake Superior, it's gigantic, right? So it's just like riding near the ocean. And she was an absolute trooper. So she really, really embraced the whole experience. And we have comm systems so we could talk. She's a great passenger. She, follows. I kind of gave her all the lessons about riding. We, of course, rode short rides and around town before we ever did it. But ironically, my first ever passenger was my oldest daughter, Ava, and she rode on my Nightster with me. And she rode just, all short rides and in town. And then my youngest daughter, Mia, 2 years ago was her first ride. So when she was 8, she rode for the first time with me on my Road King. She never rode with me on my Sportster. And she was actually really sad because every year from the time that she could walk pretty much, she had me sit her on the bike to see how long it would be before she could reach the pegs, because she knew that she couldn't ride until she could reach the passenger pegs. So the year that she knew she could reach the passenger pegs, I sold that bike, and she was afraid that the new bike was going to be too big for her and she wasn't going to get to ride.
Oh, that's awesome.
But she did. She was big enough. She grew. She's taller than her sister, and she loves riding. She actually has done. She did I think last year. Last year was her first moto vlog. Her and I did a moto vlog together, and I kind of did a little 10 question and answer thing about what she loves about motorcycles, and if she thought she would ever ride one day. And it's a really cool video that I'm super glad that I had an opportunity to do that with her, because it actually inspired a few other people to do rides with their daughters and motovlog and talk about it. So especially if people in the motovlogging world that have kids, inspired a couple people to do the same thing. So it's kind of cool.
That's really cool. Do you think either one of them are going to ride? Have you gotten them dirt bikes? Have you gotten them on two wheels yet?
No, and we don't really have any property around our area that we could ride dirt bikes on. I think my youngest has an interest in riding her own bike one day. I don't know so much about my oldest. My oldest would still ride with me for sure. She's a teenager now, and so she has her own interests, so she hasn't ridden with me quite as much anymore. But I really think my younger one, she's embraced the whole idea a lot more. She's a lot more adventurous than her older sister, and really, I think she's definitely one of those kids that if you tell her she can't do something, she goes out and does it. And so I can definitely see her being a rider someday. And really, honestly, I can't think of anything. I mean, I think it would be amazing if I could ride someday with with my wife and both my girls on their own bikes. I don't know that would come to fruition, but certainly I would love to someday take a trip with my wife and my daughters, and do some type of motorcycle experience with them together. I think that would be such an amazing experience. And so I'm hoping this season that I can at least do one overnight camping trip with my youngest daughter. I think she'd really love to do an overnight camping trip. And so I'm hoping to plan, even if it's just a short trip, just 100 miles away or something, that it would be a lot of fun to take her camping.
That would be really cool. Get her involved. Get her out there. I think it's been since we were kids that the stereotypical, the girls don't ride, but that's absolutely not true. They're very good riders, especially if you can get them started young.
Yeah, and I really try to make sure too that even on my own Instagram and through my own social media, that I try to make sure that I have contacts with enough people, not enough females in the industry, that I can show my girls, like, this is an example of of a woman doing what she wants to do on her bike, and not, maybe what a man's telling her to do. That there's other avenues other than, slapping a bikini on and standing in front of a bike and posing, or, working at an event as a bartender, right? I mean, and again, I'm not knocking those things. I just want them to know that they have more choices beyond something like that.
Absolutely true.
And if that's the path that they choose, again, there's nothing wrong with that. I just, I really want them to, if that, they're choosing that path because that's what they want to do, not because they feel like that's the only option for them. It's like, to be involved, the only thing I can do is sit on the back of a bike. That's not true. And, or well, I can only ride a Sportster. I can only ride. That's not true either. Girls ride big bikes. All of that's possible. It's just, if you want to do it, then I can help you find that avenue to help make that happen.
Absolutely. Tell you what, we got a little campsite, a little camp area at my house. I'm sure you've seen pictures on my Instagram of the fire pit. So just ride over and camp right there in the yard. We'll have a fire for you and everything, and I'll show her my daughter's dirt bike that, she probably can't even touch the pegs on. Well, she probably could. She's old enough now, but girls ride. Yeah, ride well. So I'd love to do what I can to help you get her involved.
Yeah. It'd be a lot of fun for sure. She's interested, and it's all about making the time too, and I think that's important. I think that's how you balance it, is that if you can make the time for them and you can make the time for your passions, you're doing the right thing, right? You can have it all. So
absolutely. So About yourself, you've made the comment you work in the medical field. What is it you do?
So my kind of official title is it's called the Director of Diagnostic Imaging. Essentially, what that is I run a radiology department. So all of your CT, MRI, X-ray, mammography, ultrasound, nuclear medicine, echocardiogram. I'm a director, so I oversee that an entire radiology department in a 22 bed critical access hospital.
Wow, good for you. No schooling at all involved in that, I bet.
No, not really. No, I have 2 degrees, both very hospital or healthcare orientated. So I have my degree in radiologic technology, and then I have a healthcare management and administration degree.
Well, as impressive as that is, I meagerly offer you my appreciation for your working in the frontline field for the last couple years, especially. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been honestly, it's been nothing that we ever expected to be working in healthcare, but being a part of it, it's always been. My wife and I both have had jobs that we serve. That's always been important to us to be of service. My wife's a teacher. I work in healthcare, but a global pandemic is not for the faint of heart. So it has definitely been the last, I would say, 2.5, almost going on 3 years now, have been the most challenging of my career, and I've been in healthcare 21 years, so it's been a challenge.
That says a lot. That's a good reason to get out and do some riding, isn't it?
You're not kidding. You're not kidding at all.
What plans do you have for 22 on your own rides? What are you planning?
Oh man, 22 is shaping up to be a pretty epic year. We're gonna start our long rides probably Memorial Day weekend. We're heading out to. I ride with about 4 guys around this area. We've been dubbed the White Walkers by our by our friends that live in southern states. So we're gonna start just with a weekend camp out in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So we're going to ride to La Crosse and just kind of ride around that area in Wisconsin. And I think we're going to ride down part of the river road in Minnesota. So we use the Rever app if you're familiar with that, and that river road in Minnesota is marked as one of the best riding roads in the state of Minnesota. So
it is,
and it actually goes all the way down to Illinois, where one of my friends from the 5 Degree Bikers podcast lives. We're not going down that far. We had planned to ride this summer. I don't think we're going to do that, but we are going to ride down that road to La Crosse and ride around that area. So that's going to start Memorial weekend. And then we try to plan one trip a month. I do know that we're heading down to Uranus, Missouri in July for over the weekend of the 15th of July for the 5 Dirty Bikers meetup. And that's the event that we host on the 5 Dirty Bikers podcast. It's a very grassroots event, so it's no vendors, it's no bike shows. It's really just about a group of like-minded people getting together, sharing stories, sharing some fellowship, and just getting together and finding a cool place to ride. And so we did it in Louisville, Kentucky last year, and we will be in Uranus, Missouri this year. And it's right near St. Roberts, Missouri. And we are doing that's in July. I know in August we will be heading out to Montana to ride Beartooth Pass and that area. And we might make an off-season trip to the Sturgis area. So we haven't quite decided. We still have September and maybe October and June where we haven't quite decided our trips yet, but we are making those plans very quickly. I think the other thing that's on the menu possibly is riding to Michigan, so like Mackinac Island area. We've talked about that. And I think what was the other place that we were talking about this next season? There was one other location that's been on our radar for this next season. I don't remember, but then typically we ride either a Saturday or a Sunday every weekend during the riding season. So my crew gets together, we pick a destination, we go ride there. We typically have lunch and ride home. And so at the end of our riding season last year, we rode to Bismarck. So we did a 500-mile day for tacos. So we rode 250 miles, had tacos, and rode home.
Seems like a good day.
Yeah. But that was at the end of our riding season. We don't want to start. Last year, I think we started our season with a North Dakota Harley dealership trip. So we hit every dealership in North Dakota in 36 hours. So that was about 1,000 miles in 36 hours. And we camped in Teddy Roosevelt State Park, which is all the way on the other side of North Dakota by the oil fields.
Okay. How many Harley dealers are in North Dakota?
There used to be 6. I think there are 5 now.
Okay, I was going to say, I didn't think there'd be that many. There's more fence posts than people up there, so.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Yeah.
No, there can't be too many Harley dealers, let alone motorcycle shops, are there?
No, in fact, there was a dealership in my hometown here in Grand Forks that closed last year. That was part of the close off that Harley did the last couple of years. And then there's basically one shop in town. There's people that do, like side work out of their garage, but there's one like legitimate Harley centric shop in our town here. They're good. They're a very good shop. I've had some work done with them. So, and I like to do that. If you want your local dealer to stay open, your local shop to stay open, you need to bring some business to them. That's, people complain that there's not enough of those local things around, but the only way that that's going to happen is if you support them. So
absolutely correct. And you're not paying them, a ton of money for changing that tire. You're paying them a ton of money for the experience they have and making sure they change it correctly. That's one big thing I hear is about pricing on tire changes. And it's like, do it yourself one time. You'll pay it.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah. I mean, there's, and even some people are like, oh, I don't want to, I can save that money. I can change my oil myself. That's true. You can, right? But then when your bike breaks down 2 days before you go on a long trip and you've never developed a relationship with your local shop, don't expect them to do anything for you last minute.
You know what I mean?
Right. But if you've developed a relationship and you've paved your way into a relationship with a shop and your bike breaks down and you need to go on a trip 2 days later, they're a lot more likely to help you out because they know that you're their customer and that you spend money in their shop. Even if you buy, say you're just going to do your oil change yourself, that's fine. Buy the oil and buy the oil filter from your local shop. Are you going to pay a few dollars more? Absolutely. But you're just doing that to build that relationship and keep that shop open and keep them in business. Those local shops are such an important part of our community. And if you want to keep them open, you got to throw some money their way.
Absolutely.
And I always say too, like, don't bitch about it. You know what I mean? Like when you go there and they say, how much is it going to cost? Then that's what you pay, right? Don't say, well, the local guy down the street's going to do it for me for less. You're paying for the knowledge that they have that you don't have. So don't bitch about it. Pay their price because otherwise, you don't go to your local mechanic and when they say to you, my rate is X number of dollars per hour, you don't try to negotiate the hourly rate. You just pay it to get your car fixed. Do the same thing with your motorcycle.
Or look at it like your own employment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so, and that's just, there's so many like small businesses within the motorcycling community, just like yours, that people can support that are, that feed the community and it becomes about relationship building, just like our relationship and has turned into a friendship, started from conversations that were motorcycle product related that turned into more than that. And that happens so easily in the motorcycling community.
It really does. I say every day that I am one of the luckiest people alive to get to do what I do every single day. It's awesome. And you as well. You get to sit, once a week, visit with your friends, talking motorcycles. Sounds like you're riding every weekend. Life's pretty damn good, really.
Yeah, it for sure. I think that if you, like anything else, if you put the work in and you put the time in, you're going to reap the benefits and rewards of all of those things, right? And at the end of the day, just don't be a dick. And, if you kind of follow that pretty simple philosophy, I think you're going to find that the motorcycling community is a pretty amazing and giving place. And you start to build those relationships, and there's almost nothing that anybody won't, you're on the road somewhere and your bike breaks down and you put out a message on Instagram, and you're probably going to have 10 people that are going to reach out to you and say, I can help you, or I know somebody in your area that will.
It is a small world for sure.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Talking about social media, let's talk about Kidmoto. Where,
All right.
where did the name come from?
I've been asked that question, and I actually did a video on it that was pretty important to me. It was one of my first probably 5 videos that I did. And so when I was younger, my grandparents, like many grandparents in the upper Midwest, they had kids and they had a lot of grandkids. And my grandpa was a upper Midwest farmer, and none of his grandkids that was local around him really had any interest in farming. But I really loved it, and so I spent as much time with him in the summers when I was in North Dakota as I could, and usually spent about a week with him and riding around in the tractor and driving grain truck, and basically the basics of farming. And he always used to tell his buddies, it was kind of a local joke, that he had so many grandkids he couldn't remember their names, so he just started calling me Kid. And so that just stuck. That name, that nickname, that moniker just kind of stuck. And he called me that his whole life while he was alive. Just had that nickname for me, which was, and obviously he knew my name, but it was just kind of a standing joke, right? And so
Yeah.
So that and then obviously moto came from motorcycles, and then 22 is just a number that's important to me. And so that's kind of where that whole thing came from.
That's cool. I didn't watch your video, so I apologize. I did not see it, but I'm guessing now a lot more people know, once this airs, more people will know how you got the name Kidmoto.
Yeah. And it was I just kind of threw together the things that made sense. And if anybody knows anything about, making a name for a YouTube channel or for Instagram, everything out there is taken. So you have to, if you have something that's unique and important to you, typically that's going to be something that's not taken. And so that in itself became easy to build around.
Talking about that, talking about your Instagram page, what type of stuff are you sharing on Instagram? Is it focused towards doing one thing, or is it more personal life? What is it?
I share a little bit of my personal life in terms of, honestly, the only things from my personal life that I've really shared is like times with my kids on my motorcycle, with my wife on trips, and kind of like vacation pics, but the rest of it is almost 100% motorcycle centric. And that's really what I use my Instagram for too, is it's almost all motorcycle centric. It's, podcast centric. I don't really dive into my work. I'm not a, look what I ate for dinner tonight poster. I don't do anything like that. It's all motorcycle centric. Of late, I've posted some videos when I have gone to different events, and that really in this last year, I made a post of a flat track race that Mama tried, and 2 of the videos that I posted absolutely went insane, and they combined for over 20 million views.
And it was a hilarious video.
it was pretty funny.
Cool.
It was pretty funny. Yeah. And so I kind of hit that, perfect video with the perfect music that made it funny, and it got shared a gajillion times, and it's been copied. That's a little bit irritating, but it's been copied and reposted on some repost websites and that kind of stuff. But I know it's been viewed on my social media over 20 million times. It's been viewed in social media, I would guess probably twice as many times. So
sure.
I've seen at least 3 other times people have sent this and said, "Hey, isn't this your video?" And I look on there and they have 15 million views on a video that's not even theirs. So
they're just sharing the love.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, if they give me credit, if they post it and give me credit, I'm fine. But when they post it as their own video, that's a little bit. I don't like that. That's, to me, that's a little bit. You're trying to get some type of notoriety off of something that you didn't create on your own, and I just, I kind of disagree with the idea of that. And so even now, when you put videos on Instagram, there's been a couple of companies out there, and I won't say who they are, but they've ripped off some influencers' videos and posted them on their own websites. And so influencers have now, we watermark all of our videos with our logos, and and I'm not I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's part of the kind of the situation. And so, there's a YouTube and Instagram really changed the world of marketing, especially in the motorcycle world with magazines kind of going by the wayside. There's been a lot more value placed on a creator, and we've even had some conversations with companies that had creative departments that don't have those departments anymore, and they completely utilize influencers as their marketing department.
Yeah, I know some companies that do that.
Yeah, and some companies do it extraordinarily well, and some companies that are very well known in the motorcycle industry do that, and which is if it's done right and they engage the right people, it's a pretty great relationship that you can have in the motorcycling industry, that you're developing a relationship with a company that has a footprint in the motorcycle world. That in itself is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is.
And then when you, like we did, when you start a podcast and that podcast starts to gain traction, and before you know it, you have a voice in the motorcycling world. And that, while as amazing as that is, it's also kind of intimidating sometimes, because you get to this kind of place where you're like, do I say that? Do I don't say that? And then I don't know. We really tried to focus on just being as how would I say? I don't want to say unique, because that's not the right phrase for it. As kind of humble and ourselves as we can possibly be. Right? We're just 5 people that really love motorcycles and really love the industry and really love the sport, if you want to call it that, however you want to describe it. And so we're just sharing our take, our opinions of whatever we're talking about. And one of the guys on our podcast always says, 95% of what we say is bullshit, and the rest of it is also untrue. So
that's funny. So I wanted to talk about the podcast, but before we talk about this, tell us the story of Kidmoto. How did
Yeah, I will absolutely talk about Kidmoto, because that's become a little bit of a phenomenon in this last year.
It has.
So 2 years ago, we did a Halloween episode where we just talked about on the podcast. We did a Halloween episode, and we talked about like haunted places you could visit on your motorcycle. And this year, true to form to the 5 Dirty Bikers, we did a situation where we all decided, okay, we are going to dress up. But we decided amongst ourselves we were not going to share how we were going to dress up. And so if anybody out there in podcast land knows me, like I described to everybody before, I'm 6'3", 230 pounds. I also have a giant beard, and I'm pretty heavily tattooed. And so I thought it would be great to kind of play on the whole, just turn that whole thing on its head and show everybody that, really that motorcycling, sometimes we all take ourselves too seriously. And if you know anything about our podcast, we don't. I mean, motorcycling is supposed to be fun, and it doesn't have to be all big dick energy all the time. And so we just get out there and try to have fun. And I decided that I was going to dress up as a woman for Halloween. And so my 14-year-old did the best makeup job she could that was over the top. And I got a wig and a nice purple feather boa, and boom, Kidmoto was born. And in fact, I'm pretty sure one of my daughters dubbed me Kidmoto. So yeah, it was that's where Kidmoto came from, and showed up on the Halloween episode. And since then, I think it had people feeling a certain way, because I've been getting lots of Kidmoto requests. So
it's funny, it comes up about every other episode, I think.
yeah, and we always have somebody in the live stream that says something about Kidmoto. So I think what resonated, with a lot of people was just the idea that you just don't have to take yourself so seriously, right? I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable in my skin. I wasn't going out of my way to make fun of somebody who, maybe is more comfortable dressing as a female. I wasn't making fun of anybody. If anything, I was making fun of myself. And so because I maybe have, with a big beard and tattoos and a big biker guy, right? I kind of have some very, very masculine tendencies. And so, or maybe what would be viewed as masculine tendencies. And so I just put that out there, like, just have fun with it. Just life, you don't have to, everything doesn't have to be so serious all the time. And it really resonated with some people. I think just like that idea of just cut loose, let your freak flag fly sometimes.
Absolutely. It was hilarious. So, Five Dirty Bikers, you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier how you kind of transitioned everything to social media. Now you're an original of the Five Dirty Bikers. Is that all part? So that obviously is part of that transition, but how did all of that come together?
So I got kind of looped into a group text with 5 other guys that were all riders, and they were doing some event planning for a camp out. And during this group text, we just were sharing, funny quips and this kind of this rolling conversation. And somebody said, we should make this into a podcast. And that's really how it was born. It was born out of a group text. And then if you know anything about obviously working with a group of people, that sometimes you have situations where it does and doesn't work out for everybody. And so we've had obviously a little bit of a transition over the course of the last 3 years of people that have joined and quit, and some personnel changes and that kind of stuff. And that's all, internal portions of the podcast. And then before you know it, it got very big, and we had to kind of treat it a little bit more like a business. And so we had to incorporate and do some other things to really treat it like a business. And so, while we are absolutely in it for the fun and the camaraderie, and we're all great friends, we did have to transition it to a little bit more of a business model at some point. And we do treat it very seriously in terms of what that looks like as far as our relationship with vendors and sponsors and kind of everything that goes along with that. But at the end of the day, we still share a group text. That's where 99% of our podcast information, in terms of like topics and how we do our business and talking. I mean, I talk to the people that I do the podcast with. I talk to them every day. A lot of the members of the podcast, I talk on the phone probably 3 or 4 times a week. I've broken bread with them. I've shared, I've slept in their house. I've met their wives and their children, and we are truly very good friends. And so, and that makes it so much more fun, because then it is a business, but we're good friends, and we're kind of an all or nothing deal. In terms of it being, if we were deciding on a topic that we wanted to talk about and one person just really hated it, or we were going to have a guest on and one person just wasn't feeling that guest, we do something different. So everybody, it's kind of an equal share kind of a situation. As much as we can have it be that way, it's still a business, obviously with the things that come along with that. But it's a ton of fun. And I work with some great people that have a great skill set in terms of like, Dustin, who's on the podcast, is kind of our creative guy, and he's done t-shirt designs for us, and he does all of our thumbnails, and 99% of our editing is just his incredible talent is just in all of that part. And Tony knows a lot about technology and cameras, and everybody just brings a different thing to the table. And those of you that know, for the better part of our podcast, in existence, we have 4 guys and 1 female rider. So that's been that way since our 14th, about 16th episode of the podcast is when we transitioned to having 4 guys and 1 girl. And I think we will probably keep some type of lineup like that intact as long as we can.
Yeah, that's really cool. So about the podcast, for those of you that don't follow it, it's a video podcast. You do it on YouTube. I never watch it on YouTube. I always listen to it when it comes out on Apple. So how tough is that to coordinate for everybody?
So we are 5 riders. We're in 5 different locations all over the country. We're located in North Dakota, 2 people in Kentucky, 1 person in Illinois, and 1 person in Virginia. And so we record a video with a video software that's designed to do that with. Kind of like Zoom, we use Zoom, we use StreamYard. So it wasn't necessarily always going to be a video podcast, but we found that easier from a conversational standpoint to be able to see each other when we're talking. And so
Sure.
there's less, it's more of a normal conversation, because the whole premise behind that podcast is this. You say you walk into a bar and you look in the corner and you see 5 people sitting at a table talking, and you're like, oh, that person has a Harley shirt on. I'm going to go over there and start up a conversation with them. And you walk into a conversation that's already happening. That's the premise of our podcast. It's very informal. It's conversational. We don't really do a lot of research. If you hear us talking about a topic of motorcycling, it's typically because we have a knowledge base on that. Like I said, my motorcycling started in the 80s. So I've got a fairly vast, knowledge base on motorcycles, and Tony's been riding since he was a kid, and so we have a good, a knowledge base. And the other people have been riding less time, but they've been all in the time that they've been riding, so they have a very good knowledge base too. And we all ride different styles of motorcycles. They're all Harleys, but they're all different styles, and so we have a bunch of different perspectives, and we all ride a little bit differently. I ride long distance. 2 of us ride long distance. The other 3, Justin's kind of trying to do long distance stuff. Tony will never ride long distance. And Brittany is a fairly new rider. She's been riding about 1.5 to 2 years. So it's just a great mix of people, a great friends that I really enjoy. And we have, this last year has been an absolute banner year for us. It started out kind of ending. We had some personnel changes at the end of the year, but right after those personnel changes, like kind of during that transition time, we were nominated by our fans for the Cycle Source Awards. If anybody knows, Cycle Source magazine does a variety of awards, and those awards that they give out are voted on by people in the industry. So when they start posting on their Instagram about the Cycle Source Awards, you go onto a website and you vote for all of these different categories. They have best artist and best painter, best female painter, best bike builder, best, new custom part, they have, I think there's 20 categories. And anyway, they had media release of the year, and we were nominated, and we were like, this is an absolute amazing thing that we were nominated. We were nominated in a category with some pretty heavy hitters that were all part of the industry. We were the only media outlet that wasn't connected to the industry somehow, that were just 5 people that were on the outside looking in. And we had done a really good job in the previous kind of 1.5 years, kind of cementing our place as a solid motorcycle podcast. And then we won the 2021 Media Release of the Year Cycle Source Award. And that was, and if anybody knows anything about Cycle Source, it's Chris and Heather Callan. They are just icons in the motorcycle industry. Both of them are, and have a deep, deep, deep history of time spent in the motorcycle industry in so many aspects of it. And like I said, to be nominated was an absolute honor. To win was totally unexpected. I mean, we didn't even know we got nominated. One of our fans actually sent us the link and said, hey, you guys were nominated. That was absolutely amazing. And one of our fans reached out and told us when we won. They actually, the Callans announced it on their show that they do on Sundays. And somebody was watching that live stream, and they sent us a message and said, you guys just won this award. And we were like, what did we win? What are you talking about? And we found it and reached out to them, and we've had the Callans on our podcast. It was an absolute joy. We will be joining them hopefully within the next month or so on their Sunday show. And that was kind of how we began 2022, was winning that award. And then last Sunday, actually, I don't even say last Sunday, 3 days ago, we just hit our 200,000th download of our podcast. And again, that's just all credit to the people that are out listening to our podcast. And we have had an amazing ride. It's been a joy talking to some of these people that are in the industry, some people that are major influencers. We had one of my and Tony's personal heroes, an 80s skateboard icon, Steve Caballero, we've had on our podcast. We had a guy that holds a Guinness Book of World Records for riding across 2 continents and he was on our podcast, and he had a discovery show. And so we've had just some amazing opportunities of some people that we've had on our podcast that have been, it's been such a great opportunity. And through that process, we've made friends with people like Jared Weems. And if anybody knows who Jared Weems is a custom bike builder. He builds mainly Triumph motorcycles. He's out of Florida, and he now has a motorcycle that will be displayed in a museum that he built off of a replica of a David Mann painting. And so he was actually giving that bike away for charity. He gave that bike away to the Forgotten Angels charity in Florida. The person that won it was then contacted by another person who bought it, then donated that bike to a very well-known museum. So that was an amazing experience to get to know Jared and become Jared's friend. And now we are on the Five Dirty Bikers podcast are working with Jared Weems and Blockhead. If anybody knows who Blockhead is, he's an influencer in the motorcycle world who has gotten to be pretty large, and I would say pretty to very large in the motorcycle world, and opened up his own shop in Florida now through his social media content and everything. So he has his own shop, and he works with a master Harley mechanic, and they continue to put out content. And so we're going to be working with Jared Weems and Blockhead to do a charity bike build this year. And so, well, when I say this year, I said, it'll be within a calendar year. Jared is doing a bike build. He was a invited builder to Born Free this year. And so we have to wait till he's done with that. Then we're going to be getting a Sportster, and we're going to be building a Sportster chopper with Jared Weems doing the majority of the fabrication, and Blockhead and his crew are going to do the engine work. And between the two of them, they're going to build this bike, and we're going to raffle that bike off for a autism charity that Dustin, that's on our podcast, has picked out. So if any of you out there know anything about our podcast or have listened to it, one of our members, Dustin, has a child with autism. And so we've always been very passionate about and connected to whatever charity that directly is connected to something that Dustin is working with. And so we kind of let him go out. He picked a charity, and that's kind of where Jared came in, because Jared also has a son with autism, and that's kind of the connection there. And we got people fired up about it and passionate about it. And we will have sponsors of some pretty big companies in the motorcycle industry that are going to be working with us. And I can't say any of those yet, because we have to get the motorcycle and we have to start the process. But we did a online vote through our own community through the Five Dirty Bikers Discord. So we have a Discord, which is a chat server, and it's free to join. So you can go to our website, www.fivedirtybikers.com. You can jump on there and join our Discord. That's absolutely free. And it's basically just a chat server for like-minded motorcyclists. We have about 560 people in that community right now that are in part of that community. And through that community, we basically took 10 different versions of Sportsters, and we did a March Madness bracket and had everybody vote on what they wanted, and Chopper won out in the end. So we will be building a Sportster Chopper, and it's going to be definitely going to be a custom build by Jared. So it's going to have Jared's take, and it's going to have a Go Fast motor in it, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
The Chopper won by a landslide, didn't it?
When it got down to the end, the Chopper won by the landslide. Yeah, there was some voting kind of in the middle where there was a couple of bikes that were really close, but at the end voting, Chopper pretty much just hands down won. But yeah, it did win out, and which is fine. We, if we were being selfish in the Five Dirty Bikers podcast, we would have liked to seen something, kind of out of the box. But I think that people, everybody in the community, they want to see a Jared Weems chopper. And so that's what we're going to do, is a Jared Weems chopper. So yeah, we're super excited about that. And Jared's son has already dubbed it the Harvey Danielson. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, is he? I'm assuming it's going to say Harvey Danielson on the side on the tank instead of.
We
I hope so.
absolutely, we hope so too. In fact, if it were me, I would have a very traditional Harley logo painted on it with the name Harvey Danielson instead of Harley Davidson. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But we're not that far into the build yet, so we have a long way to go before we get there. But yeah, and one of the really cool things about this is the personal touch for Jared is that his son is going to be working with him on this bike. So that's super exciting for us. And then we're hoping at some point we will all be able to make a trip out to Florida as a group or even individually to be able to get out there and take pictures with the bike and ride with Jared and ride the bike ourselves before we raffle it off. So yeah, we're really excited about it.
I bet. Can always head down for Biketoberfest. That's another reason everybody
Yeah,
can go down to Florida.
yeah. We don't know about the timing of everything yet because, like I said, Jared doesn't have time to work on it until after his bike build is completed, and so and we're still on the hunt for a bike. So if anybody out there in podcast land knows of a late model Sportster, preferably pre carbonated, or we're looking for a carbureted Sportster, so pre fuel injection. Even better if you know somebody that could donate one to us, we would be super excited about that. But yeah, we're still searching for a bike because we kind of we would like to do this, obviously a budget build and from that perspective because everything is out of our Five Dirty Bikers pocket. So we are donating our money from our Patreon that we have to go towards purchasing the bike if as we need to, parts, paint, all of that kind of stuff. So because it is a charity build, the more people that we can shed a light on in the community that would be willing to donate time, services, parts, bikes, everything, we will be highlighting all of those individuals throughout this whole process. So with the number of people that listen to our podcast and downloads, I can tell you that it would be national and international recognition for any of the people involved. So
That would be very cool. You've kind of made my job pretty easy. I think you checked every box of every question I was going to ask or thing I wanted to highlight for the Five Dirty Bikers. The only one left is what are your goals for the show?
We've been asked that a few times, and we've kind of all said as long as we continue to have fun, as long as we continue to enjoy what we're doing, as long as we continue to grow and get traction on it, we're going to do it as long as we possibly can. Do I think that the lineup will change? I think that we're all we've talked about it. I mean, we're all one major life change away from not being able to be a part of it because it does take a significant commitment. We try to record with all 5 members every week. There are times when we have commitments. Obviously, family comes first, that kind of stuff. But to be a part of the podcast, you have to be willing to donate or to dedicate some time to it. And so that's just part of the process. And not only time on the podcast recording, but time outside of the podcast doing what's required from a social media perspective, what's required from a content creation perspective. All of those things take time. And so that's a part of the deal if a person is going to be a part of the podcast. And so between the actual podcast continuing to grow, I mean, I hate to say this, but we would all love it if it became a syndicated show. I mean, that would be absolutely amazing, right? There are a few podcasts in the world that get to that point that can be syndicated, that can be, I don't want to say national because we're already national. Anytime you put a podcast out there for consumption, it's already national because anybody can download it from anywhere.
Right.
So, but a syndicated show that had enough sponsors that we could live off of would be absolutely amazing. I don't know if the motorcycle community is big enough for something like that to happen. We've talked about branching out and talking about different topics, but we're not quite there yet. There's so much untapped potential in the motorcycle world that we haven't even scratched the surface of yet, that I think we have content for as long as we want to within the motorcycle community. But that and growing our event, I mean, the Five Dirty Bikers meetup that we have, and we didn't name it that to be, to look for a pat on the back. We just named it that as amount of recognition. It's always been a grassroots event. We know that as these events grow, they kind of sometimes morph into something maybe that you didn't start it as. So we're really working with that as organically as we can. It's not like I said, it's not a bike show. it's not a competition. It's, if you're going to go to this event, you should know that it's going to be about fellowship, and it's going to be about riding, and it's going to be about making connections in the motorcycle world. We're not, we don't do biker games. We do some things obviously that are fun, and we have some things planned. And we try to do sponsor giveaways. So anybody that's involved with our podcast, we always reach out to sponsors and ask them to donate so we can have some things to give away for people that show up. And what I always tell people is make, don't make it about the destination, make it about the entire trip, right? So if you're driving from 3 states away, make it about, the whole thing. The trip there, being there, and the trip back should all be part of the experience. Don't just crush the miles and then get there and be disappointed that the event is not what you thought it was, because we are clear and try to be as clear as we can to everybody that it's not a Sturgis, it's not a Daytona, it's a really grassroots kind of situation.
Perfect. And this year everybody's riding to Uranus, so how can it be awesome?
Everybody's riding to Uranus. We're gonna invade Uranus, so be prepared.
Yep, be prepared. And if you're tuning in to the 5 Dirty Bikers after this, then be prepared to hear Uranus jokes a lot.
And we're called the 5 Dirty Bikers for a reason. So it's not your grandmother's podcast. We are strong on the language and innuendo. So we don't go out of our way to offend anybody, but we're also, don't play it with your kids around and then call me and tell me that your kid learned all kinds of swear words from me, because that will happen.
It might. Yeah, like I said, I think you've made this very easy for me. We've touched on everything. Anything you want to mention before we get to my favorite part of the show, the 5 questions?
No, I think I have. I think I've put out as much as I can.
Yeah. No, this has been awesome. So you've listened to the show now. I know that. So you've heard all 5 of these questions, which prompts me to think I better come up with a couple other thinkers so I can throw them in and mix them up for people. But so you got a little bit of an advantage, but the 5 questions obviously designed to make you think, and I love the answers I get. So the first one, what is something you believe that other people think is insane?
I actually said this earlier, and I said it. I think you can have it all. I know that that's a bit of a cliche statement, but I think that I've seen a few times in my life where people, they get married and they have children, and they think that they have to be a certain way, and that, the way that they were prior to getting married or prior to having kids is not going to be acceptable when they have kids or when they have a job, and they feel like they can't be who they were prior to that. And I think that's absolutely the wrong way to look at it. If there's any lesson to be learned from the last 2 years, people need to know that it's an absolute fact that life is short, and nothing is guaranteed, right? And so in my house, we believe in living our life, which is, a lot more surrounded around, if you've heard the phrase, buy the damn bike, right? So many people waffle around making these decisions of whether they should or shouldn't do something. And at the end of the day, when you're old and you're in a nursing home, the only decisions you're going to regret are the ones that you didn't make, right? The decisions that you didn't make. I mean, very few people regret making a decision or saying the word yes. So
I agree. Very well said. Second question. What is the best or most worthwhile investment that you have made when it comes to your world on 2 wheels?
I thought about this question probably one of the most, and there's two things that I really need to mention. The number one thing that I need to mention is my support structure, and when I say that, I'm really talking about my wife and my kids. My wife is absolutely my biggest supporter of my passion about motorcycles. She knows they're inherently dangerous, but she also knows that riding a motorcycle and being involved in this community is not what I do. It's part of who I am. It's absolutely a part of the way that I identify myself. And I think having my wife as one of my biggest supporters has always been one of the best investments. And that was all about just being open and honest with my wife and being transparent about my feelings about motorcycles, and her knowing that, I don't go out to be reckless and do things dangerous. I believe in safety gear. That's not to say that I'm not going to ride in jeans and a t-shirt, but I always wear a helmet. You know, I am a safety conscious rider in terms of, you know, knowing what my skills are, practicing my skills, knowing how to emergency brake, doing all these things. And some people might think that that's, you know, they're like, oh, well, you know, he's not a true motorcyclist. And that might mean something different to everybody else, but that goes along with having it all, right? And so having that investment in my wife as my greatest supporter is my number one. And number two would absolutely be the investment in the podcast has been one of the best things to happen to me in the motorcycle world. And not because it's been successful, but because of the relationships that I've been able to develop along the way with people like yourself, with my friends on the podcast that I work with, and the relationships and the real genuine friendships that I've made because of that podcast are absolutely invaluable to me. And so that would be the second thing.
That's awesome. Two great answers. Let's see. So that leads us to the next one. What is the worst advice? And you probably get this being on the podcast. What is the worst advice you see or hear being dispensed in our world?
You know, we talked about not necessarily this question, but the idea when we were talking about modding motorcycles, when somebody says that this is the only right bike, this is the only right modification, this is the only, you know what I mean? The thing that I love about motorcycling in general, especially Harley Davidson's, is that we buy a stock bike, right? We take apart a perfectly good brand new stock bike and take all these great parts off it and put a bunch of stuff on the bike that we want to see on the bike.
Right.
And so, you know, when people tell you, oh, you did that wrong, or you didn't, you know, if they're telling you that because you've inherently done an install wrong and it's dangerous, then yes, please tell someone, right? But if they're telling you that because they don't agree with the style or they don't agree with the you know, what I've done to my bike, fuck off. I'm sorry, right? It's my motorcycle. I'm riding it. So it's the way that I want it to look. And so, you know, I think internally in the motorcycle world, I don't think that that's great advice when people are telling you it should only be one way, right? Because we all know that great choppers and great custom builds and great, you know, people in our industry were not people that let somebody else tell them that something should be a certain way.
I love it. So the next question, do you have any asks or requests for my audience?
I think that I hope that everybody right now is looking at motorcycling differently than we did 20 years ago. And in terms of your audience or even the 5W Bikers audience, if you ride a motorcycle, I think that you should be at some point in time taking the time to be a ambassador for motorcycling, right? If somebody has asked you a question, take the time to answer that question. Even if you think it's dumb or you think it's lame, they're asking you because typically most of the time it's because of genuine interest. And if you think back to the very first time you rode a motorcycle, the very first time you walked into a Harley dealership, it's intimidating as hell. And if you're going to be that dick that's not willing to answer those questions or help somebody out, then stop riding. But I think that we all should be ambassadors of what we love, and we should help new riders. We should start, you know, cultivating that process. And I think that everybody out there that's listening should think about that a little bit and should spend some time and, you know, maybe decide, I'm going to do this one thing next year that's going to be a positive thing in motorcycling.
That's great. And that actually made me think of something. So I'm going to cut in on you once. When the other thing I see a lot of people do, and this scares the shit out of people and keeps them from getting on motorcycles, is you've never ridden a motorcycle before, so let me take you for a ride. And then I take you for a ride and I don't care about what you're thinking or fearing or feeling. I'm just going to show you how cool I am and how fast I can ride. That is absolutely the worst thing you can do. Take it easy, you know, go slow, make sure your passenger's okay, right? Introduce them in a way that makes them feel comfortable and makes them want to get involved and want to go farther and do more things on a motorcycle. Would you agree?
Right.
It just
right.
makes sense. I've taken so many new people for rides that, you know, they would never get on again because the last person, you know, their last boyfriend was on a crotch rocket and scared them to death. Where, you know, we just took it, went slow, didn't go very fast, didn't go very far, and made sure they were okay with it. Just better results. So, not to cut in on you, but I think that's another point that needs to be made. I like what you're saying.
No, I think that's absolutely true, and I think that goes back to, you know, I mean, just what you explained was exactly how I answered that question, right? I mean, you're giving back. You're potentially making a new rider. You're showing somebody that it's something to be loved, not something to be feared. You know, it's something to certainly be respected, but, you know, and you don't have to tough guy image everybody either. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like more, if you pull up to a gas station and somebody's staring at you, it's not because they think that you're going to rob them. It's because they're curious and you're doing something that they wish they could be doing, right? Even if it's just an adventure, you're doing it and they wish they could be, or they're envious or they're jealous or whatever, or they just are interested. But you don't have to tough guy them, right? You don't have to stare them down and you know, whatever. There's plenty of time for that if you want to do that. But you're not going to build new riders and build this community because we all know that this community didn't start that way. So, you know, you don't have, that's not a requirement to ride a motorcycle to do that.
Absolutely true. I think I touched on this, but give us your handles. Where can we follow you?
So you can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Kidmoto. That's my handle for both Instagram and YouTube. You can find me on the Five Dirty Bikers podcast, and you can find that on Instagram and YouTube, and it's Five Dirty Bikers, obviously. And you can find us also on our website, www.fivedirtybikers.com. That's about everything that's on there. And we do have a merch site. We have a link to donate if you want to just donate to our chopper build. We have a Discord that's free. If you really like our podcast, you can join our Patreon and support us because everything that we do on the podcast all comes out of our pocket. And so we like to subsidize a little bit. And we typically give back to the community through that. So we have giveaways from our sponsors and we do charity things. And so that's all kind of a part of our process too. So that would be the places that you could find me on social media.
Very cool. I will put a link in the show notes to Kidmoto22 on Instagram and YouTube. So you guys will be able to click. I think, I don't know, can you click through these links on Apple? It seems like you can.
Yeah, usually, if you copy and paste the links from the area, from the places you can they'll usually be that blue or whatever to show that it's a link.
Yep. Okay. That's what I've been doing. And I guess I've never actually looked back at my own podcast to see if it works. I'm just remembering that from seeing others. So anyway, that's what I'll do. I'll put those links in the show notes as soon as this thing goes live. Folks, if you like what you're hearing, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. You can follow the adventures on Facebook or Instagram by looking for The Real Wild Ass. And of course, I am Wild Ass Craig. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks. And of course, thank you again, Ryan, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on, Craig. I really appreciate it, and it's been a really good time.
Good to hear. Thank you so much.